curious incident of the Easter Bunny. I've kept it a secret for many years in order not to incriminate anybody, but now I feel it's time you finally hear about it. In 1974, your Uncle Henry and I moved to a lovely Cotswold village, which was surrounded by sloping hills and small woods. Nothing ever happened in that soporific place. Nothing until one Maundy Thursday. The shops had started their Easter decorations a couple of weeks earlier. Gorse and catkin twigs were adorned with colourful little Easter eggs. Chocolate rabbits sat in shop windows, awaiting customers. Bunches of eager kids pressed their noses against the glass, leaving dirty little fingerprints behind. It all started at the baker's. At 9:30 in the morning, a full-size Easter bunny entered the shop. The plump girl behind the counter smiled at such an unusual customer, until he pulled a gun out of his fur. She gasped for air. Two little girls who stood at the back exclaimed, "Look, Mummy, it's the Easter Bunny." The Easter Bunny passed a bag across the counter and told the shocked salesgirl to fill it up with 2 loaves of bread, 4 packets of biscuits, and one of those big chocolate rabbits. The 2 girls started to yell their heads off and hid behind the skirt of their dumbfounded mother. The salesgirl did as she was told, and before any of them could come to their senses, the Easter Bunny had left the shop, stunning them with a crazy laugh. You've got to be joking. What is this, April Fool's Day? Sergeant Lamb put the receiver down. At that moment, the door to the police station flew open, and Shirley, the owner of the local hairdressers, Light and Fluffy, swept into the room, giving full credit to the name of her salon. "You won't believe what's just happened," she piped. "Had a visit from the Easter Bunny?" Lamb asked laconically. "Yes, how did you know?" "The baker has just been on the phone. They've also had the pleasure." "I don't know if you can call it a pleasure." Shirley, known as Curly, worked herself up. "If this was supposed to be funny, I'm not laughing. Can you believe it? This rabbit hops into my salon, throws himself into one of my chairs and demands shampoo my fur and cut the whiskers and get a bloody move on. I'm a busy bunny these days. All the teeny weeny Easter eggs have to be delivered." Then he laughs like a mad hatter. I tell you, like a mad hatter. Oh, Sergeant Lamb could barely hide a smile. "You can't say the character hasn't got a sense of humour," he mused. Sense of humour? At first I thought it was quite funny, but I changed my mind when he pulled a gun and yelled, "Give me the dough, baby." As if there'd be any money in the till at this time in the morning. Really? And all the while he sat there in front of a mirror, swaying his long fluffy ears from side to side. Plus, he grabbed all the Brill cream, telling me it was good for his fur. Well, what cheek! After that, he skipped out of the salon, laughing his head off. Jack Tapp, the plumber, tried to stop him, stepping in his way, but the bunny just bounced him out of the way. And you know what a tall and strong man Mr. Tap is. Shirley blushed. Now, between the two of us, it was an open secret that our curly Shirley had a crush on Jack Tap. I suppose you could say he was her pipe dream. Oh, wait a minute, but I digress. Right. Poor Mr. Tap. He fell over like a cut-down tree, Shirley sighed. Sergeant Lamb had to smile again, but he was also very annoyed. It was clear that a madman was poking fun at the villagers and the police, and he took that as a personal affront. This was now a matter of honour. Angrily, he readjusted his tie when the telephone rang again. "Money robbery!" squealed the off-licence owner down the phone. "He took 5 bottles of eggnog. And you know what's the worst? The way the bastard laughed. I swear I'll never forget that as long as I live." Sergeant Lamb had heard enough. He put on his helmet, stormed out of the station, and swung himself onto his bicycle. The off-licence was only 2 roads away, so the bunny couldn't be that far off. "I'll get that scoundrel," Lamb thought to himself, and started to pedal like mad. He passed the house of Mrs. Antenna. As usual, she was pottering around in her garden. She was the #1 gossip of the village, and hardly anything escaped her attention. The daffodils in her garden were in full bloom, and the first crocuses starting to show their lilac heads. "He went that way," she pointed out, towards the small wood. "A huge Easter bunny. He was laughing and cutting capers just like a real hare." Lamb grunted. He wiped the sweat off his forehead. That blasted police helmet. It was getting warm now. Botheration. What kind of trickster was taking the mickey here? Lamb had reached the edge of the wood. Not a trace of the bloody bunny. With an apprehensive feeling, the sergeant rode into the thick, dark wood. The birds were twittering their spring songs. The tender green of the first leaves was beginning to sprout. Lamb stopped and took off his helmet. Oh, the cool air was a relief. He took a deep breath. Then, all of a sudden, there was like a crackling noise behind him. He got off his bike and turned round. He received a blow to the head. The last thing he saw were a pair of long ears, while the last thing he heard was a malicious laugh. When Sergeant Lamb started to come round again, his colleague, P.C. Fleece, was kneeling beside him on the ground. Lamb saw a number of villagers standing round in a circle, bewildered expressions on their faces. Carefully he touched his throbbing head. P.C. Fleece picked up his boss's helmet and grimaced. "That's going to be a nasty bump on your head, sir. You can forget about putting that thing on for a couple of weeks." Well, Lamb grunted. He snatched the helmet out of his constable's hand and threw him some angry looks. What on earth got into that greenhorn to lecture him in front of everybody? Lamb let his gaze wander over the assembled villagers. "Well," he barked, "has anybody something to tell me about the he cleared his throat, Easter Bunny?" "He's been to the butcher's as well," one of the bystanders said. It was Toothless Ted, the village original, 101 years old, not a single tooth left in his mouth, and as fit as a fiddle. "That bunny took the sausages! All the delicious sausages!" he chuckled. "Was at the chemist's as well," the wife of the landlord informed him. "I was just going to pay for my facial cream when he stormed in, laughed like a complete madman, took all the bars of soap they had, and jumped off again." Sergeant Lamb tried to get up with the help of his constable. "Anywhere where the rabbit hasn't been?" he inquired. Stumped silence. "At the post office," somebody remembered. "Yes, that's where I've just come from. I went there to complain because the postman, Mr. Stamp, hasn't been round today. Not round my place or anybody else's. It's because I'm expecting a long overdue parcel from my daughter in Glasgow. It was supposed to arrive today. He told me so yesterday. And that postman's never late." Well, Sergeant Lamb and PC Fleets looked at each other. They could tell they were thinking the same thing. The group of villagers and the policeman took the shortcut across the village green to Stamp's cottage. He was a silent, reclusive man, and nobody knew much about him, only that he'd come up from London and he'd worked in the village for the past year. Arrived at the thatched cottage. There was an open window and a breeze was playing with the curtain. "What if he's just been taken ill?" Mrs. Tenner pondered. Sergeant Lamb ignored her comment and rang the doorbell. Everybody held their breath as they listened for a response, but there was none. Lamb touched the painful bump that had come up on his head. PC Fleece tried the doorbell again. No response. Sergeant Lamb went over to the window and pushed the curtain to one side. He took a cautious peek into the living room. But what met his eye left him standing still, open-mouthed. He turned round to the intrigued visitors. Looks like we were mistaken after all, he informed them. He swung himself over the windowsill into the living room. In front of him, in an old-fashioned armchair, sat the gagged and handcuffed postman, desperately trying to free himself. Next to him, on the sofa, lay the Easter Bunny's costume, with a note pinned to it that read, "Happy Easter and happy searching." Sergeant Lamb shook his head. "The audacity of it," he muttered as he freed the unhappy postman. Then he opened the front door. "Come in quickly, please," he called. "You'll get the surprise of your life." The curious villagers followed suit, pushing past the policeman into the living room. In disbelief, they looked back and forth from the postman to the bunny costume. "I don't believe it. Who will replace all our goods now?" the gas station attendant wanted to know. Everyone agreed, and a lively discussion started amongst the villagers. "Please calm down. After all, the police are doing what they can," Lamb tried to reassure the angry villagers. "Ha!" said the butcher. "We can see what the police are doing. Nothing as usual." "Exactly," the off-licence owner agreed. "You're incompetent to let a prankster like that make a fool of you. Shame on you." Meanwhile, Constable Fleece discreetly nudged his boss with his elbow. He'd had an idea. "We should calm the people down with the help of alcohol," he whispered into his boss's ear. He pointed to a small bar on top of a Welsh dresser. Constable Lamb nodded. He took a look at the bottles. "You don't mind if we have a drink after that shock?" he asked the postman. Mr. Stamp shook his head. Lamb grabbed one of the bottles and opened it. "I guess you could use a pick-me-up too, huh?" Sergeant Police found some glasses and Lamb filled them up. "Eggnog!" he laughed. "How fitting for Easter. Luckily, there's enough of it." After a short while, everyone sat together and sipped the delicious liqueur. Their plan had panned out very well. While the villagers were distracted, Lamb questioned the pale-faced postman. "And you didn't recognize him at all?" he wanted to know. Mr. Stamp shook his head. "No way! The guy wore black stockings over his face. Underneath that bunny head." He shuddered at the memory. "I was just getting ready for my morning round. I was sorting the packages and the letters when the doorbell rang. At first I thought somebody wanted to sell Easter eggs. What an original sales pitch. But then the guy suddenly pulled a gun and pushed me back into the living room. When he saw the mail and the parcels, he told me to put it all into a bag. Then the bastard tied me up and gagged me. He even wrote a note with my own stationery. What cheek! I'll never forget his nasty laugh as long as I live. Mrs. Tenner took pity on the postman and topped up his glass. There you go. Get that down, you dear. You'll feel much better. Always does the trick for me, she giggled. Mr. Stamp drained the glass in one go, while the villagers carefully nipped at their eggnog. So, Constable Lamb decided, let's give Mr. Stamp some space for now. I'm sure he could do with the rest. Come on. He pushed the complaining villagers towards the front door. Then he turned round to the postman, and with a warm smile he said, "You'll come to the station this afternoon, won't you? For the official statement. After all, everything has to be above board." The villagers reluctantly returned to their homes. They were in a foul mood. Wasn't it always the same? The police were useless, the rascals got away scot-free, and the little man was once again the fool. I'll tell you my secret now. That same evening, my Henry and Mr. Stamp finished their eggnog with a malicious laughter.